श्री गुरुभ्यो नमः। हरिः ओम। गणानां त्वा गणपतिगुं हवामहे कविं कवीनामुपमश्रवस्तमं ज्येष्ठराजं ब्रह्मणां ब्रह्मणस्पत आनशृण्वन्नोतिभिः सीदसादनं श्रीमहागणाधिपतये नमः। सदाशिवसमारम्भां शंकराचार्यमध्यमाम् अस्मदाचार्यपर्यन्तां वन्दे गुरुपरम्पराम्। Atmaswarupa Bandhugana. I am thankful to Shri Vijay ji for his kind invitation and also his generous words of introduction. And I am glad to see all of you. Most of you I know by face, and quite a few of you I know by name also. And so I am very happy to spend some time in your midst. And I am very thankful to Shri Kumar, who received me yesterday at the airport and also received me here in a very traditional fashion. He was all ready with mantras and all that. So now I will proceed to describe the Vedanta Dindima verses one after the other. I made a note in my book. I concluded verse number 56 on 21st August 2012. So we are visiting the text after some gap. This only proves how fast the time flies. So in Srimad Bhagavatam, time is described at least 100 times as Karala Ramhasaha Kalasya, something like that. Karala Ramhasaha, Karala Ramhaha, Prathama Ekavachanam. So the one which has terrifying speed. If there is one thing which has the most terrifying speed, that is time. When you think of the speed with which it moves, we get frightened. In the sense that the life is getting expended quite fast. That is the idea. So 15 months have just passed so quickly, and so here I am looking at the verse number 57. As Shri Vijayji has pointed out, the Vedanta Dindima is a very interesting text. Pujya Swamiji told me, you teach Vedanta Dindima to some of these people, like that, long back, more than a decade back. Then I took the text and looked at it and started teaching it. Each verse is complete in itself. You don't need to connect it with the earlier verse or with the later verse. It is a unit by itself. And there is a gradation as you move from verse 1 to verse 94. 94 verses are there. But the stepwise arrangement of the verses is not that critical. So much so, you can study the verses pretty much at any point within the text. And also the way the verses are structured it supports that viewpoint. Namely, every verse ends with an expression, with a phrase, Iti Vedanta Dindimaha. Thus proclaims Vedanta. Dindima is a proclamation. So Dindima, the literal meaning is the drum beat, the drum. So drum implies a drum beat, which further implies a proclamation, an important proclamation. This is the ancient way of proclaiming the king's edict or decree to people. So a person, the king's employee, he comes to the village square and beats the drum. And so then that implies that the king has a message to pass on to the public, and therefore all the people assemble there. He beats it for some time, a minute or so, and when the people assemble, then he will declare loudly. So this is the Dindima. And so Shankara must have noticed it somewhere, and he picked up the metaphor the context as a metaphor for his text. So Vedanta Dindimaha, the proclamation of the Vedanta. You see, like the King's Edict, the proclamations of Vedanta are about life. Generally, the students of Vedanta make a mistake of looking at Vedanta as a professional pursuit. Like you want to register in Stanford University or some such a good university and do a course. 1 semester. The course may be 1 semester or it may be 4 semesters, etc. And at the end of the course they will give you a certificate with a grade and all that. And that certificate can be of some use, less or more use in pursuing a career in the social life. This is how a professional course is looked at. And all that knowledge has a lot of importance. In its place it is great. And generally in Vedanta we prefer to call it a professional skill rather than knowledge. So it is also knowledge. In its place it is wonderful, but in comparison, in the context of Vedantic wisdom, we call it, what people call knowledge is so much of a professional skill. That is what it is. So that means the skill that we acquire, it may be physical skill, in the case of an engineer or a surgeon, etc. Physical skill amply supported by understanding. That is how it is. It's not that blind physical skill. Or it can be a teaching skill, so that you become a teacher or a professor, etc. Or it could be some kind of accounting or economic kind of skill which you operate and make a career in society. So what we call knowledge in the context of these professional courses is so much of a professional skill which is very essential. One has to acquire that skill to make a living in the society. And living is good enough, but more than living, people want to make a career out of it, people want to make a social life out of it. So some embellishment to the living they want to do. So in that context also, these professional skills are very useful. And so that is what it is. But we really don't want to call it knowledge. Even if you call it knowledge, it is called knowledge of the lower kind, apara vidya. And there is always a higher kind of knowledge, para vidya. That is called knowledge. And sometimes we prefer to call it wisdom, because to contrast it with the meaning of knowledge that is popular in the society. So in the society, the word knowledge means, what is the meaning of wealth? Suppose in the social context we say wealth. What does it mean? It means accumulation of physical objects and also money. At one time there was no money. Money was invented later. There was only barter system. And at that time, wealth means physical objects. That's why in Sri Sukta, etc., some of these encomiums where wealth is described and also sought by the devotee, you don't find the mention of money. Money came later. In the first 15 ruks of the Sri Sukta, you don't hear the word money. Money comes at the end in Phalashruti, somebody has added Dhana Agdir, Dhana Vayu, like that. So, you find all the goodies of the world. Goodies and services. So, like a ratha, a chariot. In modern terms, a Mercedes-Benz kind of a car. And a chauffeur in India, not here. Here everybody drives his own car, but in India, a chauffeur, I should say, a chauffeur, yeah. Spelling seems to be like that, doesn't matter. A chauffeur. We have a chauffeur in India. That is considered, if a person drives his own car, that is considered a bit lower, in the social structure it is a bit lower status. A chauffeur is waiting for you, that is considered. That's why we have all those descriptions in the Sri Sukta and all that. Therefore, what is wealth? Wealth is accumulation of things. That is wealth. Things including money also in modern societies. And what is knowledge then? What is knowledge? So it is also another accumulation. You accumulate, and when you accumulate wealth, you need a bungalow to keep all that which you accumulate. You need a bungalow. And if you accumulate jewelry, you need a locker in the bank. That is how it works in India. Here I don't know how it works. So you hire a locker inside the bank, and so you can put your jewelry in it. If you have one or two small things, you don't need a locker. But if you accumulate quite a few of them, then you will need a locker. So people are accustomed to accumulating. Human nature is like that. And professors, etc., they accumulate books. That's why we have a very thriving second-hand book market in America, second-hand books market. In India, they don't do that much of it. Whatever book they want to study, that alone they purchase and read it and keep quiet. But here they accumulate. So, in modern societies, this habit of accumulation, it becomes all the more important in people's lives, because in modern societies, there is the effect of industrialization. It is called industrial revolution. And so, industry, fundamentally, its hallmark is mass production. That is what industry means. Mass production. Whatever you produce in mass. That is how the word industry operates. Therefore, if you have to make a Coke bottle, it's not that you have a pot in which all this liquid is sitting and you make a cup and put it in it and give it. It's not like that. It is not offering one cup at a time anymore. It is producing 1 million bottles in an hour. And so mass production. When you have mass production, then you need to have one more critical factor to make an industry successful. That is a marketing network, distribution network, not marketing, distribution network. You should be able to keep this bottle of Coke available anywhere in the world, anywhere. Once I went to Manas Sarovar, Kailas Yatra, and it was very difficult to get a piece of bread there for eating. But you can get a Coke bottle. In Kailasa Yatra, you can purchase a Coke bottle there. There cannot be any place more remote, more uninhabitable than that. But their Coke has reached already. Good number of Coke bottles will be there. You can purchase 20 of them without batting an eyelid. So this is the distribution network. That is also conquered by modern societies because of the discovery of wheel and also petrol, etc. So they have conquered. Now they have to conquer the human mind. That is all. That is the missing factor. So you have to put this habit in the human mind of accumulating. It is already there to some extent. So you have to really enhance it so that people will be habituated to accumulate. The power of habit, which is called by Aristotle as second nature. Power of habit. And so, accumulation is the habit that people have. And so now, the people come to study Vedanta. And they come exactly with the same approach. Because that is the power of habit. You cannot overcome the power of habit easily. So you want to accumulate. Everywhere you are accustomed to accumulating. So here also you want to accumulate. So accumulate what? Knowledge. For accumulating wealth, you need a home, a bigger home and a bigger home, so that more and more wealth can be accumulated and kept there. So similarly, for accumulating knowledge, you need an intellect. Intellect is such a flexible bag it is. How much can it be flexible? There is no limit to it. The physical body has very serious limitations up to which it can go. Very serious limitations, physical body. For example, running. So even the fastest runner cannot run as fast as a bicycle. Because the physical body has very serious limitations in everything. Even the best glutton cannot eat as much food as more food than a certain amount. Physical body has limits, But mind has no limit. Intellect has no limit. Physical body has aging thing it is, whereas mind, it also undergoes the process of aging in the reverse direction. Means as you become older and older, you can accommodate more and more in the mind. So, mind, the intellect has that kind of a power. You have to train it, and you can accommodate any amount of knowledge in it. And you can stretch it further and further. Without your knowing, it gets stretched by itself. So, today you can start learning a classical language and become a scholar in it. Within a few years, you can become a scholar in a classical language if you start it now. The age doesn't matter. That is how the bag called intellect can accumulate. It can accommodate any amount of knowledge. And so, these conditions are so ripe for a context in which the student of Vedanta looks at the study of Vedanta as accumulation of knowledge. And a perfect professional approach it becomes. And so study of Vedanta becomes another professional skill. So you become professionally skillful in the study of Vedanta, and so that has its own associated advantages in the social context, like any other professional subject, Vedanta becomes like that. I don't know why I entered into this discussion. That was not what I planned. In fact, I have planned very little, but I have gone into an entirely different direction. So, Vedanta should not be approached like that. In fact, a Mahatma asked me, "Oh, you seem to be a Pandita. So, are you studying Vedanta like a printed book? Like the books printed by Gita Press, etc.? Or are you studying Vedanta as the study of the book of life?" That is the question he asked. When you are studying Gita, so which bhashya you are reading, which book you are reading? So Gita Press book or some other book, which translation you are reading? So you are reading like a printed book, or are you studying it as a book of life? The king's decree is directly connected to life. And the king's decree is understood even by an illiterate. A person who doesn't know even to sign his name, who puts a thumb impression in the place of signature. So even he, we have this in India. If you come, a government application form, signature / thumb impression will be there. Not like here, signature. There we have signature / thumb impression, because some illiterate people will be there and they will put the thumb impression. And even a person of thumb impression means he doesn't know how to sign his name. He is illiterate. Very wise. He could be very wise and very knowledgeable also. He may know many things which the professional people may not know. He knows many things. For example, he knows when it is going to rain and when it will be hot, and all those things he may know without knowing any letters even. So, even such a person can understand the king's decree. And he will follow it in his life. He understands it and he knows its significance. And if he has any doubt, he gets it clarified by asking somebody, a government employee, and he follows it in his life. That is the significance of Dindima. It has nothing to do with your literacy or education, because it is about life. Life is common to all. A rickshaw puller, a monk, a king, a rich man, all of them have a life which is common. You see, in our life, we try to highlight the differences among people. If only we change the habit from highlighting the differences to highlight the commonality, you are a jnani already. You will be liberated from the bondage of samsara then and there. Because whether he is a king or a poor man, they have the same life. Raja ho ya rank, like that they say. So life is same, life is common. What is not common is the outer embellishments which do not matter really speaking. Life which matters is common to all. All human beings, it is common. And if you go one step more, it is common to all life forms. So, the Vedanta is a proclamation about life. It is not another piece of knowledge to be accumulated. And therefore, you are all very senior students of Vedanta, and also you have an incisive intellect. I respect you on that note, on that point, and therefore I tell you, you please think about it with an open mind. When you are accumulating, you do not know. And when you are knowing, you are not accumulating. You think about it. So, when you know, you are not accumulating. You think about it. When you know, suppose the king's decree is declared, and you know it. The taxes have to be paid within 10 days. That is the decree. And you hear it. And now you know it. Oh, 10 days time, I have to collect and pay the tax of the king. So you know, you are not accumulating. You are knowing it. Whereas, you sit and I tell you a poem. And I make you by heart it. You by heart it. So there you are accumulating. Like na karmana na prajaya dhanena. This is all accumulation. Which is good. I am not saying anything against it. Everything is good in its place. When you say na karmana na prajaya dhanena or gananantva, so it is an accumulation. It need not be an accumulation. Need not be. But it could be an accumulation. I am not saying it is an accumulation. It could be an accumulation. So, anyway, I made the point. I am only trying to justify it. I made the point. When you are accumulating, you do not know. And when you know, you do not accumulate. Whatever you know, it doesn't get accumulated. It doesn't get accumulated. It need not be accumulated. It is something beyond accumulation. You know it. That is what Vedanta is. And now you have to look at the text Vedanta Dindima in that sense. I am not suggesting you need not know Sanskrit. I am the first one to encourage people to study Sanskrit. When somebody, young man, comes to me to study Vedanta, I tell him, come on, go and study Sanskrit. Because everything is good in its place. Accumulation is good in its place. For example, if you wanted to eat 2 pieces of bread, you don't purchase 2 pieces of bread. You purchase a bunch of bread pieces. So that you will be keeping them with you for 5 days, it will serve you. Accumulation is good in its place. But if you do not know the difference between accumulating and knowing, you will miss the whole point. So Vedanta Dindimaha, it is the proclamation of an edict of the Vedanta which people have to know. And therefore it's an edict of the Vedanta. So can I call edict? Yeah. It's an edict of the Vedanta so that it's like King's decrees 1, 2, 3, 4. So there may be some interconnection between the decrees, but you can look at every decree itself also. That is the beauty of this text. And when I study Shankara's Bhashyam, it doesn't sound like a scholastic book. It does not. It speaks with your heart, provided you have an open heart. Suppose you have trained yourself in a scholastic way, in the accumulation mode, then it may sound a bit different. But if you have an open mind, and you are in that receptive mode, in that knowing mode, it is like you are in communion with the heart of Shankara. If Shankara sits before you, what will you do? You will do Pada Puja. That is all what you are going to do. Once you have done Pada Puja, at the end of it you do like this. Means you have washed off your hands. Once you do a Pada Puja, you wash off your hands, because you already get a fulfillment that what needs to be done with reference to Guru, you have already done it. And learning will not be there afterwards. Could be there, but quite more often than not will not be there. Whereas Shankara need not come and sit before you. You are in communion with Shankara when you are studying Bhashya. You are in communion directly. It is as if he is sitting before you only, because you are not interested in physicality in any case. So, therefore, the Bhashya, that's why it is called Bhashya. Bhashayam bhavam bhashyam. It is in the boli. Bhasha means boli. It is not a scholarly language. Of course, it is scholarly in a different sense. But from the Bhashyakara's standpoint, he is not showing his scholarship before you. He is revealing his heart to you. So, we can really study Vedanta in such a mode of communion. And so these verses are very beautiful in that sense. So with that simple introduction, I would start analyzing these verses. So the verses are very profound. They are like aphorisms. Means, you see what they say when they go in rocket to outer space. So they take food in the form of capsules. You just take a capsule and munch it down. Your body is supplied all the required calories and energy. So, because they cannot carry all our menu there, So these Vedanta Vindima verses are like that. Very profound and very loaded verses. You may say the first verse for this session, which is the 57th verse. Dehadikoshaga satta yasa vyomadi bhutaga mana bhavanna tadbhedaha iti vedanta dindimaham. Yeah. You see, there are a few things that you have to put in place before going any further with that verse. So, when you see an object, when you know an object, how much is, what is it that is conveyed by the sense organ or the sensation? There is a sensation, in every the cognition begins with the sensation. For example, this is a flower. That is a cognition. I recognize it as a flower. I cognize it as a flower. So it begins with the sensation. Namely, the light reflected by the object falls upon the retina, and in fact it falls in the other way, in the opposite direction. In the upside down way it falls. And then the mind, it receives the optical sensations. And so they say there are rods and cones, etc. in the retina. The optical cells, they create an optical sensation, maybe in the form of alternating current. So this is the dynamics of sight. And so that alternating current, there will be millions of pulses. So that optical sensation is in the form of a flow of, or a band of a few million pulses in a fraction of a second. That kind of pulses they are. And all of them are integrated. It is like our MRI, magnetic resonance imaging is there. There, when a particular part of the body, it is subjected to the magnetic field, and so some electromagnetic radiation is also impinged upon it, and it absorbs. And having absorbed, it starts releasing that extra energy, whatever. And so you will have millions of pulses coming from that body part. And all those pulses are detected, and they are to be integrated. There is an integration, mathematical process will be there. They call it some Fourier transformation or whatever. And so that the integration, after integration, you will get the result. You can read that result. Before integration, you cannot read anything. So here also, the pulses that arise out of that optical nerves, they are integrated by the brain. In the brain there is a center for optic center is there, which receives all these pulses and integrates. And having integrated, the outcome of that integration is the idea that it is a flower. You got the point? So, therefore, the object is not responsible for your cognition of the flower. Object is responsible for sensation only. Object contributes to sensation. And what you cognize is not the object anymore. It is the idea. It is an idea. What you call flower is an idea. And what is outside is the counterpart of that idea. Got the point? So now you look at it from the outside. What is. What is. But because of the faculty of sensation, what you cognize is the counterpart of what is. And that is idea. Therefore, flower is an idea. Flower is not what is. Then you may ask, what is it? That what is what? We will come to it later. But first, this much you try to understand. What you call flower is an idea, which is a counterpart of what is outside. Okay? Are you okay with me up to that point? In fact, this is what is called a reflexive analysis. It is there in Vedanta, in the Upanishads, it is there in Shankara's Bhashyas, you find it everywhere. In Dakshinamurti Stotram also you will see it. It was introduced in the Western philosophy for the very first time. It was not there with Aristotle or Plato. It was introduced by Immanuel Kant. He was the first to introduce in the Western philosophy, in the history of Western philosophy. It is there in the Upanishads and with the Shankara Bhashya and also with Buddhist philosophy all the time. Buddhists were experts in this. It is with them all the time. Means historically, you can put it anywhere between 500 BC to 1000 BC. They all knew it. This is put in a very beautiful perspective by Immanuel Kant in his critics of reason and all that. Critic of reason, critic of cognition, like that. So a few critics are there. In that he presents it quite well. Therefore, when you call it a flower, I am only building the ground for one simple point. I am coming to it soon. So when you say it is a flower, please don't rush to the conclusion that there is a flower outside, therefore I am saying flower. You are not right in that. You are a student of Vedanta, you know. You are not like a layman. So there is a flower, therefore I see. Who put that flower there? So plant has put that flower there. And who put the plant there? Earth. Who put the earth there? God. Where is the God? He is in Vaikuntha. So that is not Vedanta, you know. That is religion and a layman's language it is. If you are a student of Vedanta, you should be more than that. So, what you call flower is an idea that you get as a counterpart to an object which is there outside. We don't even want to call it object. To whatever is. Whatever is. So, flower is an idea. Therefore, you have to look at this cognition in a proper way. I will describe it further in evening class. I have to keep some of it for the evening class also. So, for the present I only say this much. When I see this, I say flower with eyesight. With eyesight, when eyesight has some doubt about it, then you have to adapt to the another faculty, hearing or sense of touch, to make things very clear. Ultimately, all of them operate in similar way. Suppose I close my eyes and then touch it. Then I do not right away say it is a pink flower and all that. It is a hibiscus flower, pink flower, beautiful flower. All those things I won't say. What is it I say is, oh, there is something here. That is what I see, what I cognize, right? There is something here. And when there is something here, the mind wants to add an idea to that something. That is how mind functions. Mind is the most impatient thing in our life. It wants immediately to connect the counterpart of an idea to that sensation. So when I touch it, it is only a sensation. And mind is not satisfied with sensation. It doesn't want sensation. It wants to superimpose an idea right away. And therefore, the mind, it doesn't say, oh, there is something. It doesn't say like that. It wants to know what is that something. And then, so I touch it further. Oh, could it be a flower? Yeah, it seems to be like a flower. And immediately, who is there? Tell me what flower it is. It is a hibiscus flower. Oh, is it so? Okay, now mind is satisfied. Right? Mind wants to fit an idea into every sensation. If there is sensation and no idea corresponding to that, the mind remains baffled. That's why people, they cannot remain at ease unless every sensation is connected to the corresponding idea of an object. If there is something, they can sense it, but they cannot connect it to a known idea, then they are uneasy, and so they will start, oh, what is that? What is that? Hey, come on here, what is that? You tell me. I don't know. Oh, then call somebody else, you have to know it. So, there is a thing called sensation, and there is a thing called the idea of an object. That's why Shruti also says, Vacharambhanam. It is Vacharambhanam. Means when you say flower, Arambhanam is beginning. So what you say flower has its beginning in speech. And the speech, it corresponds to an idea. And the idea is a counterpart of what is. You got the connection? And therefore, if you insist that what is flower, you are not a philosopher, you are a layman. If you recognize that what I call flower, Vacharambhanam, what I call flower, is an idea, is a counterpart of an idea which is a counterpart of what is. That is philosophy. You should be honest with yourself, You should not rush to hasty conclusions, and you should be very open-minded. Because my parents told me that it is a flower, my guru told me it is a flower, my guru's guru also told me that you should not start like that. That is not a study of Vedanta. In Vedanta, you are your guru. You are entirely on your own. You are entirely on your own. If you think that your guru will give you a piece of knowledge, you are only psychologically dependent upon him and you will be frustrated. Let me tell you the truth. You are entirely on your own. Atma is the Sadguru. Guru is there always. Everything is beautiful in its place. I am not questioning it in its place. I am not questioning it in its place. I will question it out of its place. So, therefore, you have to understand there is what is. There is what is. And that how do you know there is? With eyesight I know. Or with sense of touch I can know. With hearing I can know. There is. So, there is denotes the outer. And I am denotes the inner. Are you okay with me? There is, I don't fill up that gap. If I say there is flower, it will be very misleading. Because what is. And flower is not what is exactly. Flower is the counterpart of an idea of what is. Therefore, so what is. Therefore, there is, you see, you never perceive objects. In your life, you do not perceive objects. You only perceive sensations. optical sensations, auditory sensations, only those things we perceive. We do not perceive objects. What we call objects are counterparts of an idea, counterparts of what is. So one has to understand that. Anyway, therefore there is denotes the outer. I am denotes the inner. Now, you should not say, I am the father, mother, brother, sister, I am the professor, I am teacher, I am guru, I am shishya. All that you should not say. If you add all those things, like you add flower, book, coffee, tea, etc. to the outside objects, like that you add all your identifications to that, then there is no Vedanta again. So this Vedanta is such a critical thing it is. It is the most critical it is. It is like critical temperature. You know, there is a thing called critical temperature, 15.3 degrees. Critical temperature for solidification of carbon dioxide gas or something. And if it is 1 degree less, it won't happen. 1 degree more, it won't happen. Exactly. Critical. Very critical point. Vedanta is very similar. So I am, pure I am. Don't add anything to I am. Don't even add gender. Don't say I am Californian. If you say that, there is no Vedanta. There is only identification. Don't even say I am a student of Vedanta. That is also identification. You don't need it. You, at the beginning, while doing prarthana, that is enough. And so I am the inner. There is outer. What is it? There is outer. What is? Don't say flower. There is pure sense. Sense it is. You have to sense it. Sense is knowledge, that awareness. So pure sense of being, or awareness of being. Awareness of being. Therefore, when you, with the eyes, you become aware of the being, the presence. That is how you become aware. And when you say I am aware of the primordial presence, being. I am aware. That is what I am. When I say I am a Californian, first I am aware of the being and then superimpose a mental concept upon that being. Therefore, when you say I am, that is the being, a sense of being, and when you say there is, that is also the sense of being. Therefore, in Sanskrit, in the verse, it is called satta. Satta. Okay? The sense of being. That is what it is. Satta. The being. The sense of being. What you have outside, what is outside is a satta. The sense of being. And what is inside is also satta, the sense of being. To make this vision more clear, let us examine this inside and outside a little more. So you have to reduce the inside and outside to some levels, so that to some categories, so that we can make the analysis more meaningful and apply it to the entire field of outside and inside. The field of outside. Outside is not just this flower only. There is true. There is like that. The field of outside is there. And the field of inside is also there. So the field of outside is, for the purpose of understanding, easy understanding, you need to categorize, So we have the 5-element model. It is like in chemistry, if you want to study the properties of various elements. In chemistry there are many elements. In chemistry you don't study object after object after object. That is not how you study. Oh, let me study this flower, let me study this cloth, let me study this table, let me study this rod. That is not how they study. They look at all these so-called objects of the world are made up of how many fundamental building blocks, elements. 100 or 100 of them. Let 100 odd. Okay, let us start with first one, hydrogen. Let us study about it. Then the second one, helium. Now let us study about it, chapter after chapter. That is not how they study. They want to study like that. what they do, the 100 odd elements, they divided it into a few groups, 8 groups, group 1, group 2, like that. And now they 8 groups they study. Similarly, the object after object you don't study here also. We reduce them to fundamental building blocks. They are called 5 elements. And because every time what you call a flower is the counterpart of an idea. There is an idea inside and the counterpart of that idea is flower. So, flower is an idea and object is its counterpart on the outside. That is how I have to put it. So, therefore, instead of going by the object names, etc., these fundamental building blocks are 5. Why 5 only? Why not 4 or why not 6? Because there are 5 kinds of sensations that we have. Ultimately, everything that is has to be connected to a conscious being, one who becomes aware of that. I will tell you a principle. Esse ist percipi. This is the principle of Bishop Berkeley, proclaimed by Bishop Berkeley sometime in 16th or 17th century, whereas it is there with us all the time in the Upanishads and in Bhashyas, etc. Esse ist percipi. It is a Latin expression. It means to be is to be perceived. To be is to be perceived. Unless somebody perceives it, its existence cannot be validated. That is the idea. So when you say something is, it means it is perceived. It is in the awareness of somebody. That is the idea. Anyway, I will discuss it further in the evening. Evening class also will be on similar lines. So the point is, the outside being, the outer, what is the outer. And so this outer satta is in the form of 5 basic sensations. 5 basic sensations. The satta has to be recognized, has to shine in the awareness of an individual. Therefore, it must be loaded into that awareness in the form of a sensation. We have 5 sense organs, and so corresponding to the 5 sense organs, you have 5 sensations. And the 5 sensations include what all that is. And so the outer is now in the form of 5 elements, panchabhutas. You see, these panchabhutas are not like objects, like a flower is an object, a table. You don't find them like that. They are 5 categories, and they correspond to the 5-fold sensations of a conscious being. Okay, and they are akasha, the most subtle; shabda, corresponding to shabda sensation, sound sensation; vayu, corresponding to touch sensation; shabda sparsha rupa, corresponding to optic sensation; and rasa, corresponding to taste sensation; and gandha, corresponding to smell sensation. These are the 5. Therefore, what is the outer, the sense of being, is 5-fold. So vyomadi bhutaga ya satta. That is the verse. So the sense of being present in, ga means present in the 5 elements. So akasha, vayu, tejas, which is Agni or Rupa, corresponding to Rupa sensation. Rupa is eyesight. And Apaha, waters. And Pruthivi, earth. These are the 5. Therefore, there is, the outer is associated with 5 elements. So the entire universe is now reduced to 5 elements. Pruthivi, Apaha, Tejaha, Vayuhu, Akashaha. These words are known to you. And then when you say Pruthivi, it is the sense of being. It is the sense of being. And Pruthivi is an idea associated with that sense of being. Right? And apaha is the, unless you put, apaha is rasa, you have to put it on the tongue and cognize the taste. Then only it becomes apaha. Otherwise it is not apaha. Therefore, what is, but apaha is the idea of what is. Anyway, so this area we have covered. So apaha, that is the sense of being in the form of apaha. The sense of being in the form of tejas or agni. The sense of being in the form of vayu. The sense of being in the form of akasha. For example, there is space. All around there is space. So space, we do not treat it as void. We treat it as something which is. In Buddhist philosophy, not by Buddha, Buddhist philosophy, in Buddhism, Buddha and Buddhism will be different, not necessarily the same. Like Christ and Christianity are not necessarily the same. Krishna and Krishnaism are not the same, they are two different things. There is no connection at all between what Krishna says in Gita and what kind of Krishna that we worship. There seems to be no connection whatsoever. And you need at least 2-3 Puranas to make the connection. So, therefore, in the Buddhist philosophy also, the space is taken as a void, which is not acceptable. So, space is what is. So, now you can look at, I am looking at only two things. There is, I am. There is the sense of being connected with the 5 elements. Panchabhutas. The entire universe is covered now. Nothing is left out. And then I look at I am. That is the sense of being. Here, you don't look at the size of it. Size is not important. Size is also what you cognize only. Small, big and all that. I am small. There is big. Don't say like that. This is small, big. You are not small. You are small only with reference to the body, with reference to the physical body. Now, we have seen the sense of being which is in the outside, 5-fold elements, and come to inner, I am. When I say I am, within that I am, so there are a few categories. Where do you locate the I am? Depends upon that. Suppose I locate the I am in the body. Therefore, now the sense of being, I am is the sense of being, is associated with body. When I say I am, it means I, the body, am. That is what it is. Or you can associate it with prana, life. I, the life, am. Or you can associate it with emotions. People are very emotional. They identify with the emotions very seriously. And they expect others also to identify with their emotions. Not only I identify with my emotions, and so my wife, my husband, my son, my daughter also should identify with my emotions. It's a problem, So people are very emotional. So I, the emotions, am. That is another category. Within that I am. The sense of being which is inner, that is I am. And within that I am, all these categories are there. Then I, the intellect, a professor, this and that. So I, the intellect, another category. You locate the I in the intellect. That is another category called a vijnana. And then the bhokta. Body for what? Enjoy. Everything enjoy. Everything is for enjoyment. Especially in some of these worldly contexts, they say enjoy all the time. They serve food and say enjoy. They don't say, after serving the food, eat appropriately. They don't say like that. They say enjoy. Or after serving, eat moderately. He won't say like that. He should say, I wish. He says like that. They won't say, food is now ready, please come and enjoy. They say. Because people are bhoktas, that enjoyership. That is the ego. That is the central point of the ego. And so I locate my sense of being in that ego. That is a category in itself. So these are the 5 categories. And we use the word kosha, that in the case of Panchabhutas, it is called bhuta. What is bhavati iti bhutam? What is bhavati iti bhutam? Vartamanarthe taprachaya bhavati iti bhutam. Whereas we don't call it anything more than that, because there is no sentimental attachment to that. It is just what is. Whereas here, there is a lot of sentiment also associated with it, and then you identify with the body. There is a very deep-seated identification with the body. So much so, body is beautiful, I am beautiful. The body should appear beautiful. Whether it is, so it should appear in a particular way. Suppose the person is not healthy, but still he wears very good suit and all that and appears in a very good way, so that people will feel that he is doing great. He wears a safari suit or whatever, and so now he looks very great. So he must be sick inside, but still outwardly he looks very great. So the outward appearance becomes so important because it is myself. It is myself. When people are looking at me, they are looking at the body, they are looking at myself. That kind of a very deep-seated attachment. Now this attachment, or also called first identify, then you get attached. One and the same, similar. So this identification is the cause of so much sorrow in life. It really binds the person. It is like the divinity. You are essentially the divinity. And also you are essentially infinite. You are not finite. You are infinite. There are no boundaries for your nature, essential nature, which is the awareness. Awareness of pure being, it is boundless. All boundaries appear in it. All boundaries shine in it. It itself has no boundaries. So you see, the light which falls on the movie screen, that is not bounded. The scenes are bounded. They don't go beyond the movie screen. Whereas light is not bounded to the screen. Light goes all over the earth, all over the universe it will go. So, like that, there is because of this identification, you become as though limited. You as though become limited. So, therefore, this identification, it is ignorance, and it is the cause of endless suffering. So that ignorance and endless suffering, both put together, they are conveyed by the word kosha. It becomes a prison. Kosha is a prison. It becomes a prison. If you decorate the prison, that is a different thing, but still it is a prison. People decorate the prison. They are imprisoned in a home. They cannot walk out of the home because they are deeply attached to it. They cannot walk away from the home because they are attached to it. Now they decorate it. So koshas are decorated. That is so what is a kosha? We decorate. Everybody decorates in his own way. A religious man decorates in one way. A worldly man decorates it in a different way. But still decorating the kosha. So there is ignorance and there is bondage. It binds you. And there is ignorance. Both together makes it a kosha. There must be ignorance. And the big mistake or error coming out of that ignorance. Falsehood. Error, mistake are simple words. They do not convey the depth of the bondage. So falsehood it is. And so that is the kosha. So I identify with the body. So now body becomes a prison house. And the body's welfare becomes my welfare. And that puts the entire life on a wrong track. And now the body welfare is the main thing. And so the entire nation is consumed by this insecurity of the body in the name of health care and all that. So in India it is not so bad even now. There is a body and they take care of it to the extent they could and they leave it rest. Atma is different somehow. So anyway, body is a kosha. Then life is infinite. Life is infinite. Life has no limitations. Whereas life is everywhere. Whereas in identification with life, so there is bondage. That is the Kriya Shakti. Life manifests in the form of the motivity, the power of action. So that motivity, you identify with it. And so I can do this, I cannot do that. So I am happy that I can do that. I am happy I cannot do that. So this motivity, it becomes a kosha. It becomes a kosha, prana. And then emotions. We identify with emotions and they become a kosha. What is an emotion? If you give me half a chance, I will discuss all these things in big detail, but I should get the chance. So, why should you identify with an emotion? Instead of examining the emotion, you identify with the emotion. And therefore, instead of knowing how the emotional movement is happening, you end up in sorrow about the emotion. Therefore, emotion becomes a kosha, a bondage. And mistake and bondage and suffering. You make a mistake, identify with the wrongly, that is the mistake, and there is bondage, therefore you are now bound by that with which you identify, and then there is suffering. And then intellect, identification with intellect. It causes a lot of suffering in its wake. And then ego identification. So these are the 5 koshas. In every time you are locating I am in one of the wrong thing, one of the categories. There are 5 categories, and you locate this I am in one of them, and in the second, in the third, in the fourth, in the fifth. As you locate I am alternately in one or more of them, you become imprisoned in those 5 things. Therefore they are called koshas. Therefore, when you say I am, it is the sense of being inner. When you say there is, it is the sense of being outer. Now, are they separate? This sense of being inner and the sense of being outer, are they separate? If you say yes, what is the reason for that? We say manabhavat. There is no reason to take that the sense of inner, sense of being which is the inner, and the sense of being which is the outer are separate. In any case they are the sense of being only. It is not like horse and cow. It is like the sense of being inner and the sense of being outer. That is what they are. And what is the basis for this inner and outer? The body line is the basis for the inner and outer. What kind of basis it is? That is not the basis. So the body line, is it inner or outer? If it is inner, then it cannot be basis for division. If it is outer, then also it cannot be the basis for division. So the basis for division is not the body line. Body line is included in Deha Kosha, really speaking. So being the inner, it cannot be the cause of division between the inner and outer. The division between the inner and outer is due to ignorance. Ajnana is the wall that separates the inner and the outer. And so mana bhavat, there is no reason to separate the inner and outer, both being the sense of being. So the sense of being is always in the awareness of the individual. Therefore, how can it be outer? So there is no basis for this inner and outer. Therefore, it is the same being which pervades the outer and it pervades the inner. So you are that being. You are the pure being which includes all existence, which is the outer as well as the inner. This is the proclamation of Vedanta. We will discuss this in more detail in the evening class. Om Purnamadav Purnamidam. Shanti. Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om Tat Sat Shri Krishnarpanamastu.